Is Hollywood too big to succeed? We've spoken before about the problems that exist in Hollywood, but recently I've begun to wonder whether that's inevitable. Such as, are these problems simply down to poor hires and personal biases? Or is it inevitable that once a corporate culture hits a certain size, the incentives change, which force the corporate culture and the temperament of the people there to alter along with it? Would Star Wars have been locked in to a destructive path if it had never gone on the stock market? Is the destruction of Hollywood simply a byproduct of following the money, even though that's exactly what it causes you to lose? Is it just a case that multi-billion-dollar corporations are where IPs go to die? There's been lots of headlines about how the summer box office has been quickly turning south. There were hopes that it could top $4 billion, but the moment we lost it, well, we just didn't have tentpoles. All the movies did well enough, didn't hit our expectations. And so after high hopes, all we get is the flat box office. It didn't lose, it didn't really grow, it was just the same. And that's a problem. Now, many IPs that become successful start as small ideas from small companies, and then they just get consumed by multi-billion-dollar conglomerates. That's why Disney bought Star Wars and bought Marvel, both of which were worth $4 billion at the time. Since being bought by Disney, these IPs have been destroyed for a variety of reasons. A corporation isn't just an objective money-hungry machine. A corporation is made up of people, and people have their own individual biases, ideological leanings, and things they want to achieve. That leads to companies taking on a whole load of weird ideas that have nothing to do with profitability, and are just some executive pet project, like how we want to lead the world in sustainable filmmaking. By sustainable, they don't mean every film makes a profit. In fact, this article would definitely make movies more expensive. You have people wondering, why is entertainment excluding my particular identity group that I feel attached to? And a whole load of really bizarre and anti-profit hiring practices and procedures which just weigh the company down, fill the company full of complete incompetence, and inevitably lower the quality of your product and the decision-making of your company. The question is why, though? Why is any of this allowed? How come the money men at the company don't overrule all of this stuff? Why isn't there a CEO like Bob Iger looking at all these lunatics and just telling them where they can shove it? Even the previous CEO, Bob Chapek, was a money man. He had the right ideas at first, only for him to be broken and destroyed in an apology video that made him look like a hostage.
I pledged to be a better ally. Apologize for not being the ally that you needed me to be. I know that we've got work to do, and that work starts with listening.
Now, I can give you reasons, biological motivations, and psychological explanations about why everybody does what they do. The money men have always been weird. Like when Warner Brothers decided that they were going to split up their company and spin it off into a different department, only to offload the majority of their debt into one company and leave the others far more agile and hopefully profitable. My issue with it is, this doesn't make Warner Brothers any money. Disney before was saying their movies were profitable because Disney Plus was buying them. There isn't a single dollar being created in that trade, you're just moving money around inside your own company. You're essentially lying about your profits to make some numbers look better at the cost of other numbers that you may not report, or you can hide within another section of the business. And it was this article that made me wonder, why is everybody obsessed with lying about the numbers? There's no reason a business would lie about profits in a media article, and yet that's exactly what we get here. They say Sinners will make $60 million profits. Superman will make $125 million. Final Destination Bloodlines, $75 million. And Weapons, $65 million. According to knowledgeable individuals. And that's the key term. We're not even saying inside sources in this one. This is just a bloke that we think might know a bit. There is no difference between going knowledgeable sources and I think these things made some money. I could say these exact figures and Variety could report it the same way. But what was most weird about these numbers and the knowledgeable individuals is that immediately underneath it says a studio insider disputed these figures. So a guy that we found somewhere thinks this, but you are being told they're wrong by the company that makes them themselves. So why report them at all? There's no reason for me to lie about how much money I might make on a video, because it's not going to change anything. There's no advantage in my life to lie. But when you become a company of certain size, lying makes you money, and it changes the entire incentive structure of the company, which also changes the corporate culture and the people involved. This is how we end up with just sequel after sequel. Robert Downey Jr. returning as Dr. Doom and getting paid an absolute fortune to do so with the Russo brothers, because it ceases to be about the reality of the situation and what you should be doing, and instead becomes around the perception of how your company is doing. The stock price doesn't care if Doomsday is going to be profitable in 2 years. The stock price now cares about the hype that Doomsday might be profitable in 2 years. When you make a big splash, a big announcement like Robert Downey Jr., you shift from the reality of what will the profits of Doomsday be in 2 years to the perceptional reality of what everyone thinks the profits will be in 2 years because of the hype. You shift from the long-term vision about how your company will be doing in a decade or 5 years, and instead, you'll focus on the quarterly earnings now. Oh, well, revenues increased 2% this time. Income before taxes 4%. And if these numbers start going down, you're in trouble. It leads companies to obviously think about short-term profits now, burning the goodwill of the customer now to make profits for the next quarter, rather than how is that movie going to do in 3 years. We've got a bad quarter this year. Let's announce Robert Downey Jr. and pay him whatever he needs, because that'll save our stock price this instant, and then we'll hopefully sort it out in the future. If I've still got a job then. You have comments like this. Filmmaking has always been a money-making business, but in the 1990s, it went from being the main output of a company to being a tiny part of a global conglomerate. You've got people who don't know movies and don't watch movies for pleasure, deciding what movie you're going to make. If you're an executive in a film studio in the 1970s, you're always focused on turning a profit, but you were also probably in the movie business for a reason, not just that you transferred from General Electric. When Star Wars was owned by George Lucas, it was still a $4 billion company, but it wasn't floated on the stock market, and so George Lucas himself would take both the profits and the losses from the company. This means that he could make big swings, big gambles, and it didn't matter if they failed. He could have multiple quarters in a row where the company lost money, but if he made 5 big swings and 2 of them were massive successes, they more than paid for the losses. The issue is that under a large corporation floated on the stock market, that might actually break your fiduciary duty, which is where you are forced to act in the best interest of the company and the shareholders you serve. But the best interest of the shareholders is just stock price go up. It always goes up. If it goes down, you are failing the shareholders, even for a quarter. It changes the entire corporate culture away from taking big swings, big losses, prolonged losses, just so that in 5 years you can be in a better place, and instead moves it to safe, slow, incremental improvement of 2%, 3% a quarter, and it actually doesn't care about what the customer wants at all. Now everybody knows that in the long term, if you give the customer what you want, you get more money over time. But if you need money now, customer goodwill is just instant profits. It looks good on this quarter, and next quarter, that's that quarter's problem. Even as far as back as 2017, they were saying to save the movies, you have to break the studios. Well, studios are focused on tentpole films. The problem is, there's no tent. Just massive and massive poles. The problem is the bland sameness. They're designed to be that way, which is why so many of them are directed by young, inexperienced directors that are easier for the studios to push around. Directors who assert vision are often fired, or have their films substantially changed in reshoots and editing. They have to get rid of the risk takers that find the next big thing and instead make everything exactly the same as what it was last year. We have to tell you what to do, because otherwise you may not follow the path that we're already on. This also means that they make all of their movies advertisements for the next movie, which means you can never stop pumping out installments as long as they keep paying you to see them. So characters can never grow or change, not in a way that means anything, because that would be different, and different is wrong. Different would be risky and dangerous and take you down unknown paths. You want to stay on the current one that you were on last year, but 2% better. So studios make fewer films, putting more and more eggs in a handful of big budget baskets. Everyone knows that Hollywood is in a prolonged state of crisis, but there's a weird stigma against wanting to fix it. To fix it, you'd have to be new and original and creative and risky and dangerous. You'd have to have different ideas than the blob wants, a different morality than what everyone else in the company thinks is correct. And that just means they don't just see you as someone with a different idea that might make a movie that they don't like. It means they see you as evil. No wonder they go on strike and start protests at the mere thought that a company may be changing direction. People often point to the late 70s and 80s as the genesis of tentpole films, but they were nothing like today. Films like Star Wars weren't safe bets. They weren't banking on you being familiar with pre-existing IP. Jaws, Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T. were all new original properties, which studios just wouldn't back now. But Hollywood doesn't exist in a vacuum. At the end of the 1980s, Hollywood filmmaking changed in a way that we're still feeling the effects of today, the corporate buyout of film studios. News Corp bought Fox, Viacom bought Paramount, and now 90% of media is owned by just 6 corporations. When you're a smaller company, you can focus on the hierarchy of priorities. It doesn't matter if an idea will take 7 years to pay off, because you're still going to be owning your small company in 7 years. You can take risks because you also get the reward. And this high-risk strategy not only leads to big wins, but allows you to test various different business strategies. If you went off on one and made a mistake, it doesn't matter because you can cut your losses, start fresh, and go off in a different direction. And it's fine because you have no one to answer for but yourself. All of that is antithetical to the multi-billion-dollar industry corporate structure. For those corporations, big wins actually hurt you. If you're growing by 2 and 4% a quarter, and then suddenly hit a big win and grow by 50%, well, in the next quarter, you're gonna have to do it again. All you're doing is raising a baseline that you need to beat, and if you don't hit it, everyone will get disappointed, your projections will all fail, and the share price will go down. And you don't want it going down. That's actually one of the criticisms about this summer box office. They're like, well, it's equal, that shouldn't be a problem for you, but it was projected to be higher than last year, and you can come out with all the defenses you want that last year had Barbie, had Oppenheimer. You were never going to match those this year, but that's the problem. If Barbie and Oppenheimer didn't do as well last year, then this summer box office would have grown, and these titles would have been singing its praises. Under a corporate culture, everything is relative to your previous performance, and so performing well makes your life harder. This means that people don't really want to take big risks and big swings. Not only will you have a drop you've got to explain, but a massive success cannot be followed later. There was Barbenheimer. Many hoped that this marked the new beginning of Hollywood and the revival of the cinematic experience. Banking on films with an already established fan base has proven time and again to be the safer choice for Hollywood. But what does this mean for creativity and new ideas in Hollywood? Is it even possible to release new original work in this era? And that's exactly the problem that Disney Marvel ran into. For major studios that are part of larger corporations, sequels and remakes provide a clearer financial projection than original movies with unknown audience reactions. And one of the ways that Marvel kept their ever-growing box office continuing was entering the Chinese market in particular. They grew through international markets, which have now started to dry up. The issue was, to chase these ever-growing box office at the time, Hollywood had to start altering their movies, specializing them for international audiences. That meant dialogue-driven films about particularly American experiences, or particularly American looks at universal experiences, just don't translate as well as explosions. So you don't get westerns, weepies, or teen movies anymore. All you were left with is massive, big-budget tentpoles that you could focus all of your effort on and hope they win big. When media bemoans the lack of tentpoles, it's because that's what Hollywood decided to focus on, because they always had to break their previous levels. They were always chasing the short-term profits, trying to beat the one last year, so the stock price kept going up. At no point because they think, hang on, we've got rid of westerns, we've got rid of teen romances, we've got rid of comedies. We've made a mistake. We need to stop, take stock in what we're doing, and go back, then go down a different route. If you don't have shareholders, you can do that. You could stop making movies for 5 years while you take stock of what's going on. It's okay, because it'll pay off in the future, which you will own the upside of, but you can't crash your stock price for 5 years. You have to keep going forward at any cost, and there's a problem. That desire for forward momentum, slow, ever-increasing profits, lead to people who are not particularly great thinkers. They don't want to go off in new directions. What they are is very stable, very safe. They will take what you're already doing and just incrementally improve it a little bit. So if you're doing really well in China, the only thing they will do is specialize in being a bit better in China. And then when the Chinese box office collapses, they will have no alternative. These are not risk takers. They're not great creatives. They can just optimize what you're already doing and be a bit more efficient. This focus on safety, harm avoidance, and incremental improvement means there's no mechanism to correct mistakes. You can't go down the new path. This is why movies are focused on sequels. They don't know what else to do, and they can't do anything else. They can go back and trawl through your load of IPs to bring it forward and optimize it a bit for a modern audience, but they won't be mentally capable of coming up with a new idea. That's for the small companies, the indie studios, the people who have nothing to really lose, but all the upside to gain. They're willing to try things, go down new paths, find new genres. Corporations, they just want to make the same thing as last year, but with 2% bigger box office. And all of this was predictable and already spoken about in 2015. Box office picture darkens amid focus on tentpoles, analysts said. Nearly identical film franchise strategies at the studios risk accelerating already existing negative secular trends. This article could have been written in 2025. And to be honest, it was. This is an almost identical article about the same analyst saying almost the same things as 10 years ago. The prevailing narrative at studios continues to be one of box office fluctuations being driven primarily by release slate appeal. Last summer was by some measures the worst summer the industry has had since the original Star Wars came out in 1977. But don't worry, this one was worse. But he says that moreover, we think the cause of increasing concern is that major studios are all moving towards increasingly indistinguishable strategies. They all put more and more eggs in the franchise picture basket. And yet history suggests, with ample evidence, as the number of films in a given genre increases, the average film performance decreases. And even top-tier films are not immune to this phenomenon. 10 years later, that hasn't changed, with 137 movie sequels currently in development. People talk about the era of sequels and reboots. The industry industry needs to make room for new and original stories too, but they have no means to. If Marvel was still doing gangbusters, they'd have the money to actually take on losses and try new angles. That's not the kind of people that you hire when you're doing gangbusters. If you're on top, all you want to do is stay on top, and so you start to hire people who aren't particularly creative, but they're great at doing what you've always done. They are social consensus machines. They won't rock the boat. They will just all follow whatever they think the dominant path is. They'll all do as they're told. They won't take big risks, which means they won't get big rewards, but they will reliably produce the same muck you made last year. That is all of Hollywood. Jenna Ortega says that everybody in Hollywood wants to be politically correct. But what is that? That is just there is a set, correct thing that you should be. A default human with a correct set of beliefs, and if you aren't it, you are a problem. That leads to a group of people that are absolutely great at doing the same thing over and over again, and moving with the flow of whatever everyone else thinks at all times.
I take responsibility.
But what happens when you've gone wrong? What happens when the direction that you're all heading in with perfect accuracy is the wrong path? Because Jenna says that lacks honesty. I wish that we could have a better sense of conversation. Imagine if everyone could say what they felt and not be judged for it. Now, I'm not for the end, I think you should be judged for it. But at least if everybody could say what they felt in Hollywood, there would actually be a mechanism in place for them to go, our movies are losing money, maybe we should go over here. You need people in Hollywood who are willing to stand up and tell everyone else they're wrong, and we should go over here because I'm correct.
Shut up! I know he's your friend, but I don't care.
Because you know what? They might be. They may make a mistake. They may make a quarterly report look bad. But they could also make you $2 billion on your next movie. They could find you the new genre which all of Hollywood will pivot to. But if they don't exist, your industry dies. In a healthy system, you would have sequels and reboots. You'd have the generic muck, all going in the same direction, just following the person in front of them, doing what everyone else has done, and optimizing it a little bit. But you'd have your really intelligent, your really creative people, the ones which go against the grain and probably offend everyone else in the company, searching out for new ideas, testing new things, and then doubling down on what works. That's how small companies operate. That's why family businesses can be so agile. They can course correct, be completely original, and do what everyone else isn't. Whereas in a major corporation, you just hiring a CEO from another company somewhere. Bob Iger can safely gobble up companies and negotiate buyouts. But he has no idea what to do with them when they're there because he's not particularly creative or risk-taking. A CEO's job is generally anti-risk. You take risks as a CEO, you might crash a pension fund. And so Disney and the people at Disney, who are all just incrementally doing what they've always done, they'll take IPs like Marvel and Star Wars, and they'll do what they've always done with them. Make princess stories. There is no mechanism in Disney to make masculine stories because it requires people that think in hierarchy and risk. It would require people within the company who are willing to offend their co-workers and be like, I don't care what you think. It's not for you. You're irrelevant to the conversation. I don't care what you think about the weather. Your group doesn't need to be included in our movies. I'm going to intentionally break all of your hiring practices and procedures so that I can get the people this production needs. To get high risk and high rewards, to do something new, means you have to go against the grain. Break all the rules that everyone else in the company has set in place for you. And you need to be given the power to. And that just doesn't look good on a quarterly report. Somebody that wants 2% increased revenue over last year will never know why you might have to offend 80% of your company. But if you're the boss of a small independent company that you own, you don't care. I'm your employer. If you don't like it, you can leave. This is why Elon buying Twitter could change it so much. He had no one else he needed to talk to, and so he could move fast and break things. He could add things in, new AI companions, AI image generation, and it didn't really matter the effect it had. He could test it and go from there. And if he lost 10 billion on it, that's not a big deal. If it would have made him 10 times had it been a success. All he has to do is make 2 out of 10 things successful, and he's still in profit. Now explain that in a short shareholder meeting every quarter to random strangers on the internet. Explain it to them when their stocks are going down in price because your last 8 things have failed, but you promise your next 2 will make it all back. That's why these reboots are never fresh starts. James Gunn's universe kept things from the past. Marvel's future reboot is still going to keep some superheroes on, because starting from fresh and going in an entirely new direction requires a certain temperament, an ability to think outside the box, and a high tolerance for failure, and a corporate culture of safetyism, harm avoidance, not offending people. Those ways of working are not compatible, and they can't both exist. And so what you end up with is the Russo brothers getting paid $80 million and Robert Downey Jr. getting paid significantly more. No wonder he's smiling. To anyone on the outside, this may look like a big risk, but to people on the inside, they're doing the same thing that worked before, just optimizing it a little bit. This is why when Hollywood tries to fix the problem, they can't. They don't know how. It requires an entirely different mental state, an entirely different type of person in your company to decide, no, we need to cut all of this. All of this is crap. I'm going over there. Like, but we've never been over there. It's dark and scary and full of the unknown. It may fail, but it also might lead to a vein of diamonds, after which all of the ants can follow them. They decided there was a correct way of being, and if you weren't that, you were wrong. They saw the dominant social consensus in California and banned everybody who wasn't it. They got rid of the risk takers, the people who thought differently, the ones that didn't care what you thought, because they didn't realize that they were the most important people. That they're the only ones that can ask, what if you went down the wrong path, and find you a better one to go down? And I just don't know how you're going to explain that to your shareholders. That, by the way, we're firing 50% of our company because they refuse to work with the people that we need more than them. Well, the box office is more likely to decline than rise over the next few years, particularly as major studios continue to cut back on the number of films they make in favor of concentrating their box office efforts in fewer, bigger, established IP films. Their only solution is to do what they've always been doing and just optimize it a little bit. We're going to cut away even more of the lower budget stuff, even more of the risk-taking strategies that might find a new path, and instead solidify on what was successful last year. Until it isn't, because we have ample evidence that as the number of films in a given genre increases, the average per film performance decreases. Hollywood thought it was at the end point. They thought they'd found the correct opinion with the correct people, and this is the correct path. Any deviation from this can only be regressive and take us backwards into hell. And so they never even bothered to think, what if this path fails? And they got rid of everyone that asked. Hollywood was complaining about too many tentpole movies in 2013. Hollywood's homegrown summer movie crisis. They had all the time in the world to stop, go backwards, and solve the problem, and all they did was double down. And it's all they're going to do, because at this point, there's no one left in the industry who knows how to do anything but optimize what they did last year. Because the company's too big, of too many people, too incentivized to hold on to power for as long as possible to keep collecting their overinflated paychecks, where the one question none of them can ask is, what if I'm the problem? But those are just my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know down in the comments below. Like the video if you liked the video. Subscribe, more videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.